The ridge was quiet. Too quiet for how long the forward team had been exposed. Command kept asking for movement. Spotters swept left and right. Nothing. Tess hadn't moved in 8 hours. No one had asked her to. No one had asked her anything. A shimmer blinked across a rooftop 600 meters out. 1 pixel wide. Wrong shape. Wrong time. She shifted half an inch. Nobody saw her move. But the threat went down, and the mission started breathing again. The wind traced slow fingers across the high ridge, lifting dust in fine spirals that settled just as quietly as they rose. Tess lay prone against the rock, her rifle stretched out before her, one gloved hand resting on the cheek weld, unmoving. The barrel extended over a sandstone outcrop. The bipod settled low into a nest she had packed 8 hours earlier with her own elbow and breath. She hadn't moved since. A dull green tarp shifted beside her. The spotter, a junior from another unit, shifted his weight with a sigh, then again with a louder exhale meant to be heard. "You always this chatty on watch?" he asked, his voice cutting through the otherwise measured silence. When she didn't respond, he gave a small chuckle. "I mean, I get it. Theater of the still or whatever. But you know you're allowed to blink." Tess didn't answer. Her face remained against the stock, her eyes behind the scope. She wasn't watching anything. Not yet. The lens cap was still closed. The spotter leaned back on one elbow and looked out toward the valley below, where 2 ridgelines met like cupped palms around a scrubby saddle. The terrain was pale and dry, fractured with shadow as the sun began its long descent behind the western peaks. He tapped his radio set twice, checking for a pulse. It buzzed softly with overlapping channels. Someone from the forward relay was joking about overwatch posture. "Is she even real?" said one voice. "I swear I saw her breathe at sunrise and not since." "Maybe she's powered down to save energy," came another, followed by quiet laughter. Tess didn't touch the radio. She didn't twitch. Her pulse was steady, tracked by nothing but the rhythm in her own bones. The weight of the pack behind her had compressed into the earth, the edges molded to the slope. Beside her lay a small torn notebook, wedged open to a page where several wind curve notations and position ticks were drawn in tight pencil lines. The corners were curled from use. A small stone held the upper page from fluttering in the breeze. Her rifle showed its age, not through malfunction, but through care. The grip was wrapped in faded black tape, not standard issue, but reinforced where she preferred traction. The barrel wore dust like paint. The optics mount had been adjusted 1/4 millimeter, back from regulation, to align with her preferred cheek weld. None of it would pass inspection from someone who hadn't fired 1,000 hours on glass and terrain. None of it had to. The spotter checked his watch, then sighed again. "I'm just saying, we haven't seen motion downrange in hours. You could stretch, hydrate, say a word, something." Still, Tess didn't answer. Far below, a line of trucks was beginning to reposition near the comm relay. Small black dots moved across the saddle, pausing briefly, then continuing west. Dust kicked up in low arcs. It would take a few minutes before anyone down there realized how exposed they were in that draw. The sun caught her cheek. A bead of sweat slipped along the edge of her jaw and vanished into the collar of her faded undershirt. Her breathing stayed shallow, rib deep, but not tight. Controlled. She tracked nothing through the lens, because the lens remained closed. It had been all afternoon. Behind her, the radio scratched again. Another voice called in a half-laugh. "Status check. Ridge ghost. Just want to make sure you didn't dry out and blow away." The spotter keyed his mic. "Still with us. Just meditating." The reply was a chuckle and a dismissive click-off. He turned back toward her, adjusting his angle. "Look, I know your file says recon, but at some point you're going to have to actually open that scope. Right?" She blinked. Once. The motion was slow, deliberate, not tired. Just exact. Her hand slid forward 1 inch and reached for the scope. Still without speaking. She thumbed the lens cap, but didn't flip it open. The spotter tilted his head. "You see something?" Tess didn't move again. The shadows in the valley deepened. Heat shimmer gave way to sharper contrast. The sky shifted toward amber as the sun began to slip low enough to cast real shadow. The temperature dropped by a degree or two. Gravel clicked softly under the heel of the spotter's boot as he tried to reposition himself without sliding. He muttered something about stiff legs and cramping shoulders. She heard none of it. Or maybe she did. But she let it pass like weather. One high breeze rippled across the crest of the hill, strong enough to lift the flap of the tarp at their backs. It cracked once and then settled. The movement made the spotter turn his head. Tess didn't flinch. Still prone, still silent, her eyes remained fixed forward. When the wind quieted again, there was no motion left on the ridge, only her figure, curved into the land, breathing slow. The dust had begun to settle into the folds of her uniform, collecting at the crooks of her elbows, across the back of her neck. She blinked again. Once, the wind dropped for a moment, just enough to let the ridge go quiet. Somewhere to the south, a bird gave a single cry, high and sharp, then nothing. That stillness, that held breath in the land, was what brought the memory back. Tess had been lying prone in a different valley then, back when her name still held weight on the roster, and her radio tag rang first in the field rotation. It was a humid plain in a darker season, mud-packed and cracked in places, with visibility layered in haze. She remembered the scope tremble first, not a fault in her hands. A ghosting in the image at mid-zoom, right around 100.0 meters. It skewed the left lateral edge of her view by less than a tick. Barely noticeable. But she noticed. She logged the report cleanly, after confirming it across 2 other positions. She even diagrammed the mirage distortion against the weather that day, just in case it was atmospherics. It wasn't. A new software calibration had introduced a subtle, algorithmic offset. She submitted the page, annotated by hand, with the solution marked. The fix was straightforward. A patch, a review, an update. But it wasn't received that way. Her team lead at the time, Staff Sergeant Merritt, read the file twice and said, without looking up, that the system had already passed inspection. Then he asked her if she thought she was smarter than the procurement team. She didn't answer. There was nothing to gain in defending a truth that could be proven quietly. She expected a follow-up. She expected they'd test it themselves. Instead, she was rotated out of field priority the next week. No one said why. It wasn't official. But the new list came out, and her name was off it. Not reassigned. Not reprimanded. Just gone from the front page. Her gear was moved to the aux locker without comment. When she asked, the quartermaster said it must have been an admin shuffle. These things happen. She didn't contest it, not then. The instructors used to call her steady. Some had said she was rare. One, years earlier, told her she had the breath rhythm of an alpine tracker. That was the highest compliment he could give. He'd grown up in northern Wyoming and claimed the best snipers didn't just shoot slow. They lived slow, thought slow, watched before moving. He told her once, don't chase the breath. Breathe with it. She wrote it in the corner of her logbook and never showed it to anyone. That logbook still wrote in her kit. The back pocket held a folded sheet, ballistics modeling from a time she had hit 4 targets across variable elevation inside 20 seconds during a training rotation. That day, the instructor said nothing at first. Then, later, over mess. He dropped a simple line at her table. Tess, I've seen 100 shooters. Most look fast. You just are. She didn't reply. That was enough. She remembered that now, as the wind returned. The sun had lowered slightly, touching the edge of the far peak. It cast long lines across the valley below, separating light from color. Tess's cheek rested against the same section of stock it had all day. Her gloves hadn't shifted. The notebook beside her was still open to the wind diagram, but her eyes weren't on it. They were open now, The spotter had stopped talking some time ago. Whether out of boredom or realization, she didn't know. She could hear him adjusting his posture quietly behind her, no longer trying to fill the air with commentary. Maybe he was finally reading the silence correctly, or maybe he was just tired. From this angle, the whole saddle below looked calm. Nothing moved but heat and wind, no visible threat, no glint of glass or sudden shadow. But Tess had learned a long time ago that not seeing didn't mean not watching. There was always something shaping the space between motion and stillness. She breathed again, deliberately. Her pulse rode steady along her jaw. The scope still waited with its cap closed. She hadn't opened it yet. She hadn't needed to. What mattered came first, through feel, through patience, through letting the terrain speak before asking anything of it. The patch from her old call sign was still tucked into the inside pocket of her chest rig. She hadn't worn it in months, but she hadn't thrown it away either. Some days she thought of stitching it back on, but it felt more honest to keep it hidden. Quiet didn't mean compliant. It meant selective. Another breath. She had done everything right. She had followed protocol, had recorded the data, cross-checked her conclusions, offered a fix with no ego, and for that, they erased her name from a list. Not because she was wrong, but because she was right in the wrong way. They didn't see her now either, but that didn't matter. She re-centered her breath. Her fingers remained near the scope, not touching, just there. Her eyes stayed open. Still, she didn't move. The light had shifted again. Shadows stretched longer across the valley, cutting into the dirt with sharper angles. The air was cooling fast now, trading glare for grain, clarity for contrast. Below, the saddle where the trucks had moved earlier was now scattered with figures in staggered lines, repositioning with deliberate pace. Their radio chatter came through in bursts, clipped and half covered by static. Talon 3, moving east edge, confirming corridor in 2 minutes. Copy. Eyes on roofline. Nothing yet. Hold until reposition is complete. Do not engage. The voices were faster than before, less confident, more stacked. Someone cut across another mid-transmission. Background noise flared with a vehicle engine, too loud and too close. It stopped abruptly. Tess adjusted the pressure in her lower back but didn't shift her weight. Her cheek still rested on the stock. The scope remained closed. Behind her, the spotter exhaled again, louder this time. He keyed his mic and leaned closer. Overwatch 2? We still haven't heard from the shooter? Do we have her visual report? A voice from relay broke in. Negative. Ridge Ghost hasn't pinged. You got visual. The spotter looked toward Tess, then hesitated. She's observing, he said finally. Observing, the voice repeated. Can we get an actual confirm? Like, with words. Still prone. Tess inhaled once, shallow and slow. The wind had dipped. The fabric edge of her tarp no longer fluttered. The bug crawling near her lens shroud had reached the metal and paused. Sensing heat, she tracked it with peripheral vision while keeping her hands steady. The vibration from the ground told her a different truck was repositioning. This one lighter, maybe a scout vehicle. The cadence of movement didn't match the others. The spotter shifted again and spoke low, almost to himself. You've got to say something. They're going to pull you off the net if you don't check in. She didn't answer. He leaned back on one elbow, clearly frustrated. What are you waiting for? Her right eye remained fixed ahead. Nothing in her body signaled reaction, but her mind was narrowing. The noise across the channel had risen again, faster than field normal. Intervals were stacking, voices overlapping. Talon 3, come again north of saddle. Repeat, I need eyes on top right. Movement behind panel 2. Was that shimmer or glass I don't have? Cut your line, I'm scanning now. The pace made no sense. Too much traffic for what should have been clean ground. The sun had nearly dropped past the western ridge, and what light remained was angled hard across the valley. That was when she saw it. Not motion, not target. Angle. Tess opened the lens cap. It was the only sound she made. The bug crawled on, reaching the crown of the shroud. Her eye was behind the glass now, tracking the terrain like a stitched grid. She followed the top line of a rooftop on the far southern rise, past the rusted panel edge, down to the second ventilation slit. The air shimmered there, not hot, but twisted slightly, off-axis. A mirage created not by heat, but by contrast. It meant glass, curved, small, tight to the structure, not big enough to reflect. Big enough to see? The radio called again. Ridge Ghost, confirm visual. We are in motion. Repeat, we are crossing the corridor. Still no reply. The spotter leaned in, watching her now, his voice quiet but urgent. Tess. They're walking straight into the open. Her breath was shallow now, but not fast. The difference in her chest was microscopic, a measured recalibration. The scope image danced once, not from her movement, but from atmospheric interference. She compensated with her offhand, applying soft pressure near the front sling strap. She knew what she was looking at. She knew what it meant. Someone was watching her team. Someone who hadn't fired yet. She did not speak. Her pulse dropped by one beat. The voices on the net were growing louder again. Someone was shouting at the Eastern team to hold. Another team had already moved. The lines weren't coordinated. One of the trucks had pulled slightly left, too far off cover. They would be visible from the ridge. Tess didn't have the full shot yet. The angle was wrong. She needed one clean adjustment, half an inch lateral. But not yet. Not until the angle opened naturally. Behind her, the spotter was half risen now. We need to do something. Tess stayed prone. Her breath passed through her teeth in a slow, near-silent hiss. Inside the glass, the shimmer adjusted. The angle opened. The shimmer wasn't heat. Tess had already ruled that out. The light bent too cleanly, too localized, with none of the wave distortion that came off metal roofs in afternoon sun. This was tighter, controlled, something manufactured, then nested into terrain with just enough disruption to mimic background patterning. Her eye followed it through the scope, watching the outline hold steady through a 30-second interval. There was no sway, no animal, no reflection that came and went. This shimmer stayed fixed. It moved only once, barely. A flutter inside shadow, like a scope lens re-centering. She knew the motion by feel before she confirmed it by view. A shooter. Not just watching her team, but tracking them. Her breath stopped mid-cycle. Not from panic, from calibration. The forward units were already halfway across the corridor. The trucks below had peeled back toward the comm shelter, leaving 3 silhouettes exposed near the ridgeline's edge. One of them had a radio pressed to his vest. Another was crouching low, signaling something out of view. The third Dana, she thought, was sweeping west, crossing the open at the worst possible time. Tess couldn't call out. She couldn't broadcast. If she did, the angle would shift and the shot would vanish. She adjusted her left wrist by 1 notch against the dirt, her elbow tucked tighter. The image inside the scope twitched slightly, then restabilized. She dropped magnification 1 step to correct for horizon light, then drew a slow breath through her nose, holding it at the top, then releasing halfway. The shooter had a suppressor. That meant they wouldn't fire fast. They'd wait for a confirm, a neck or torso shot, something clean. Tess calculated they had elevation, but not recoil clearance. That meant 1 shot, not a volley. If they fired, there'd be no follow-up. Just silence and consequence. She looked for their margin. The shooter had to be prone. Their upper shoulder dipped too low for a sitting shot, too flat for a crouch. This meant they were breathing slow, steady, trained. Not a novice, not a scare tactic. A sniper? Her team didn't know. Radio chatter cracked again. One voice shouted over interference. We're in motion. Repeat. East side clearing now. Another followed. Stacking now. Ridge Ghost. Confirm safe. We're crossing. Still nothing from Tess. She adjusted her heel 1 inch, pressing it into the dirt to create tension up through her spine. She needed to shift her firing arm by exactly 1/2 inch to bring the scope center onto the shooter's upper quadrant. Not a headshot. That would require another adjustment. And time. This was not a time shot. It was a stop shot. The stone beneath her trigger hand was flat and worn from earlier calibration. She'd picked it at sunrise for this purpose. Not large enough to create lift, just enough to brace into if she needed anchor. Now it was her marker. If she moved too far, she'd lose line. If she moved too little, she'd clip the edge of the ridge and miss clean. She couldn't miss. The shooter downrange had not moved again, but the glint she saw now, as the sun flared across the final edge of sky, struck the lens just right. A single pixel of light refracted inside the glass. Tess moved. Not fast. Not visibly. Her body adjusted 1 increment left. No more than the breath of a tree limb in still air. Her chest shifted over her sternum. Her knee tensed. Her right elbow anchored. The scope's crosshairs moved a hair to the right. They landed on the soft band of tan fabric beneath the enemy shooter's scope mount. Her gloved index finger, until now curled gently beside the guard, lowered and settled onto the trigger face. She didn't exhale. She stopped needing to. Tess exhaled. It wasn't loud or sharp. It didn't shake or break rhythm. It simply released. A quiet thread of breath unwinding between her teeth, measured through parted lips and ending at the precise moment her lungs reached empty. The kind of breath that came not from urgency, but from knowing the wait was over. Her finger moved. The pull was less than pressure. It was memory, layered into muscle. She had rehearsed it under snow tarps and rain shelters, dry-fired until the seam of the trigger was etched into the pad of her finger like a second fingerprint. She didn't squeeze. She didn't jerk. The motion was fluid, silent, and complete. The rifle didn't kick. It settled. Sound did not erupt. It folded inward. Downrange, the glint disappeared. No scream, no movement. The shape within the scope collapsed not backward, not forward, but downward, disassembled by physics. The glass vanished. The shimmer broke. A few seconds passed before the first voice came over the radio. "Hold, what was that? Did someone see that?" Another voice followed. Faster now. Contact neutralized. Confirmed down who fired. The net scrambled. Voices overlapped. "That was ours." "Did someone call that?" "I thought nobody had shot yet. Was that command?" Tess did not move. The rifle remained anchored. The barrel tracked the same line, steady as breath. A faint metallic sound marked the shell casing rolling once against a rock, then settling in the dust beside her arm. She didn't look at it. Behind her, the spotter had risen to a half-crouch, scanning with his binos. His voice was too loud in the open air. "They're down. I think, yeah, that was a sniper. Definitely hostile. They're down." More radio voices poured in now. Static cut across half the lines. Someone shouted that the corridor was clear. A second team moved forward. The volume climbed fast, full of urgency and awe. Where did that come from? I didn't see a muzzle flash. Did someone call that shot? Still, Tess did not speak. She watched the hillside through her scope for another full breath. Movement below shifted. Two of the forward silhouettes had stopped. One waved an arm overhead, signaling the clear. The other dropped behind a truck, scanning in circles. Her eye didn't blink. Her finger eased off the trigger guard. Someone from support keyed in again. Sniper down confirmed. Unknown origin. Ridge ghost. Did you was that? She keyed her mic once. One down, she said. Her voice was calm, flat, absent of tone. Secure extract. There was silence on the line. Not long, just enough to notice. Then voices returned, lower now, steadying themselves. Copy that. Extracting team. Holding west slope, confirming rear visual. The spotter looked over at her, his face drawn tight with something between relief and confusion. You saw them the whole time. Tess didn't answer. She remained prone, scope steady, rifle silent. She wasn't watching for praise. She was watching for movement. Behind them, the wind picked up again. The tarp at her back rustled once, then quieted. The bug on her lens shroud had vanished. The stone under her forearm still braced her center line. She let her shoulder drop half an inch to settle the tension. Her hands didn't shake. The mission below unfolded as if it had never been interrupted. Vehicles moved. Command repeated orders. A third team confirmed the ridge as clear. No one asked again who fired. No one saw it happen. But everyone saw what dropped. And nothing else moved. The debrief tent was warm and loud, filled with the scent of canvas, sweat, and cooling electronics. The replay monitor glowed against one wall, its grainy footage looping in silence. A dozen personnel stood around it, half in gear, half in undershirts, all watching the same 12 seconds again and again. The camera angle came from a fixed rear drone positioned above the south ridge. It showed the valley, the movement of the forward team, the slight shimmer of light near a rooftop corner, and then nothing. No sound, no muzzle flash, no visible movement. Then the figure on the ridge dropped. "Back it up again," someone muttered, and the tech rewound it. The shooter collapsed mid-shift, the body folding into itself. From the drone's view, there was no origin point, no signature, no clue where the shot had come from. A technician leaned toward the screen. "That's impossible," he said. "There's no lift, no kick, no angle. You can't hit from there without visible shift." Maybe it was a double feed, someone else offered. Maybe another team caught it from flank. Another shook his head. "We checked. No one else had line of sight. Ridge Ghost had the only angle." The room fell quiet. At a side table, a junior officer flipped through a notepad left in the crate pile near the comm station. The paper was thin, folded with use, and covered in small, handwritten notations, wind flags, elevation arcs, sightline ranges. One page held a field diagram marked with thread-thin pencil lines. Each target position was sketched in from multiple angles, labeled by hand, then annotated with conditions that matched that day's haze. The officer held it up. "This was hers," he said quietly. "It's the whole field, mapped by hand." Someone walked over and took it from him. They both stared for a moment, reading lines that were written for no audience. "She had this the whole time," one asked. "I think she wrote it before she got up there." From the corner of the tent, another voice said, "She never looked down once. I was behind her for half the watch. She didn't even shift." A silence followed. Then someone else added, "She didn't flinch after the shot, didn't even check, just stayed there." The tech at the monitor rewound again, this time zooming on the frame just before the kill. The drone feed caught a sliver of the upper ridge, a dusted rock shelf. A pair of boots settled flat, no visible shoulder rise, no tremor. "There's no trigger lift," he said. "There's nothing." The casing was found later by one of the gear crew while clearing debris. It had settled near a flat stone Tess had used for bracing, tucked between two roots. The brass was faintly marked by dirt, the rim blackened from burn. There were no other footprints near it. Just the single casing and the indented slope where her elbows had formed a clean V. By then, she was already gone. No exit call, no gear request. She'd packed her rifle, closed her notebook, and walked down the side trail toward the temporary housing compound without waiting for a ride. A logistics officer spotted her halfway down, gear cinched tight, eyes forward, pace relaxed. She didn't look rushed. She didn't look proud. Just done. Back inside the tent. The chatter had changed. The jokes were gone. The commentary faded into questions. One of the spotters asked if she had trained in some advanced countershooter school. Another wondered if she had been pulled from an off-book assignment. A third remembered hearing something about a disciplinary reassignment that didn't make sense. None of it answered the question that lingered after each replay. How did she hit that shot without moving? The technician didn't offer a theory. He just leaned back from the terminal and stared at the feed, frozen on the frame where the rooftop shimmer had disappeared. He said quietly, "She didn't react because she didn't have to." Outside, the wind had changed direction again. It moved downhill now, pulling dusk with it, cooling the edge of the canvas where the flap hung open. A faint line of dust curved behind the departing trucks, fading as they disappeared beyond the ridge. Tess had already passed the final slope by then, her boots leaving no clear track in the gravel. The walk down was quiet, just the sound of straps against canvas, the slight creak of buckles. Her gloves were clipped to her belt. The rifle was slung tight, angled across her back with the same precision she used for everything else. At the edge of the compound, a junior crew member saw her pass. He straightened a little when he recognized her, unsure whether to say something. She nodded once. That was all. No one else looked up. Inside the tent, the final log entry was time-stamped and filed without comment. No commendation, no spotlight. Just the footage, the casing, the hand-drawn card, and the fact that when the threat dropped, no one saw it coming. Nobody saw her move. Everybody saw the threat drop. Tess was never the loudest, never the one at the center of the plan. She didn't argue when they ignored her. She didn't flinch when they questioned her place. She just waited. Through hours of heat, through radio silence and rising doubt, she held her ground with quiet certainty. And when the moment came, she didn't ask for permission. She made the smallest move and changed everything. This is a story about being overlooked, but never overmatched, about knowing your worth even when others don't, and about the kind of strength that doesn't need applause to be real. If this story stayed with you, take a moment to reflect or share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to hear more stories like this, quiet, steady, and true, follow for the next one. Sometimes, the strongest presence is the one no one saw until it mattered most.